The sponsor for today's webcast is Afinety. Afinety is a Netgain company, and it provides managed IT services for law firms. Clients turn to their cloud-enabled solutions, which combine proven industry experience with deep cloud expertise, to unlock growth, productivity, and efficiency. Our presenters today are Steve Sabka and Bill Sorensen. Steve is a seasoned technology professional with 20 years of experience in the engineering and development of IT infrastructures and solutions. His experience includes a deep knowledge of virtualization technologies with a specialization in document management systems for law firms and other industries. He provides consulting and guidance to clients on working standards for highly specialized software and hardware systems. Steve holds certifications in AWS architecture as well as document management. Bill Sorensen, CCISO, is a senior technology leader with 25 years of experience moving organizations to the cloud and leading businesses to secure environments. He is a national speaker on both cloud computing and cybersecurity to organizations working to align strategies to assist in growth and security. He has a tremendous perspective on the role of IT security in today's complex compliance landscape and has participated in over 100 firms moving to the cloud. At this time, I will go ahead and pass the ball to Bill, and he and Steve will go ahead and begin the presentation. Bill.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. Hey, Steve, how are you doing today?
I am awake. How are you?
I'm doing good. We've got a really good topic today, and so really appreciate everybody's making time for this in their busy days. Let's talk about the overall direction here. We're going to do an introduction, and then as we look at these best practices, we've got them broken up into technology, the human element, data, and then questions and answers toward the end. So let's jump right in, Steve.
Sounds good.
So as we look at security today and wanting to address it now, many things have kind of come into being over this last year, 9 months, let's say, since COVID broke. There's been a dramatic increase in pressure on law firms across the country, taking advantage of some of the situations that this is causing. And really, these increase in number of breaches are getting more and more attention, even to the point where now in New York, there's requirements around CLEs for cybersecurity. So, Steve, as we think about this and the firm kind of boundaries have changed, instead of it just being in the office with periodic remote users, we're now seeing a dramatic shift, over these last number of months to mostly remote users. And now a little bit of, toe in the water, are we going back to the office or not? Do you want to kind of touch base on that overall landscape?
Sure. So the way I like to describe this to people is, I say you need to think about your network as a castle, right? Your corporate network is your castle. You have your castle walls. So let's use the analogy. You have your castle walls. You're used to them being on premise at your office. Now you have to start thinking about expanding those castle walls to the home. You have to expand those castle walls out to your users at home. Now, you've probably been doing this in the years past with VPNs and other products, but you have more employees working from home now. Many people have more employees working from home. And so as you extend the edge of your network, you start thinking about things like, well, you have a VPN. That VPN should also include anti-malware for those employees working from their home computers. Bill?
Yeah, exactly. And I think as we are looking at that home computer is now being completely attached, it's a good time to really try and take a look with fresh eyes at this. So let's move on and kind of talk about this first one, reevaluating your security. And here we want to really focus on this idea that security is a living, breathing thing. It's not something that you look at once a year. You periodically have your technical staff do things to look at it. This is the thing that, we see happen day over day over day. The importance around, the controls you have in place, the really look at your current policies and procedures around remote workers, bring your own device. And it's a great time to, take an active look at that and really update the administrative controls that you have in place, these policies, for example. So, Steve, as we talk about that castle analogy, let's talk about that home Wi-Fi environment a little bit more. We've now expanded those walls. We've got people at home. Now their home environment really is part of this, isn't it?
Absolutely, and you really, and we mentioned this in one of our slides, where you need to start thinking differently about how you're thinking about security. So you take, for example, this castle wall analogy, right? And you are expanding your castle wall to your end users' homes. You now have to think of your corporate network as really the keep inside of the castle. And you want to make home security part of your business policies and procedures. So as you said, Bill, with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is a really good example of something that in the past people may have not thought about, but you absolutely need to start thinking about your home user's Wi-Fi. If your home user has a Wi-Fi access point that hasn't had its firmware updated in X number of years, that Wi-Fi access point at the user's house is a security risk. Somebody could be living on that Wi-Fi access point and watching everything your end users are doing at home. So if you are allowing them to access your network over a VPN, and and they're on this insecure Wi-Fi access point, you're now really opening up your network to anybody that's living on that person's network as well. So you need to start thinking about, hey, we have to incorporate things like talking to people about how they're accessing the network from home. Do they have an insecure home Wi-Fi access point?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the recommendations we've had over time, especially we're coming up to the holiday season. It's a really good time to include that in your holiday purchases if you haven't upgraded that home Wi-Fi. Well, let's go ahead and start looking at the technology portion of this. And really here, our goal is to think about technical pieces that are in place to help you as an organization and really provide an enhanced security level. First, we want to talk about this concept of remote workspaces. So these are cloud-based desktops. They look and feel just like what you're used to, but they're actually run in the cloud. These end up being able to really provide a dramatic amount of security around the environment that your users work in, as well as the data that lives there. The goal here is to really reduce the amount of data that flows out of this cloud environment and really leverage all the benefits and security improvements that are provided by that. I think one of the things, Steve, is as we look at that data and we talk about, documents and this core amount of information that's key to firms' livelihood, the focus on protecting that and keeping it inside, keeping it off of laptops and coffee shops, different things like that, it becomes a key and important piece here. Let's talk a little bit about that, Steve, those controls.
Yeah, so, where in the past you were thinking about protecting your castle walls, and now I'm talking about your keep storing your data. Well, what we're really talking about here is as the world changes and you start thinking about how do we protect our network, you start to protect your network by keeping your data inside the fortress, inside the keep. You don't give users access to the data unless they are within the network. And so implementing something like a cloud desktop solution dramatically increases your firm's security because you're no longer sending documents out onto some other network. You're not sending them over a VPN. You're requiring people to access the data while they are connected inside of your network. And you can do that through encrypted connections and everything else. So a real good best practice is implementing something like a cloud desktop, which you control. And when you need to give your users access to your data, they log into that desktop.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really good way to kind of keep everything contained, yet give your users, your employees, access they need from anywhere. Well, let's go on and talk about the concept of physical security. In the past, many organizations have owned their own physical infrastructure, and here we're talking about the equipment, the servers, the connectivity, all those pieces that make up the technology that a firm uses. And the goal here is really that, do you need to own this anymore? And if not, is this cloud a big upgrade? And what we're seeing is it's just such a dramatic increase in physical security around the infrastructure and around access to the infrastructure to move it to one of these, public clouds. If we look at Amazon, for example, or Microsoft, the Amazon environment is such a dramatic uplift. You get to transfer this risk for this physical security to them. And I think the interesting thing, Steve, is, we're sure seeing firms have many of their offices either empty or partially empty. And so talk a little bit more about, the exposures associated with that.
Yeah, so now as you're seeing more buildings being empty, you have reduced work times. You have less people in the office. So why are you still trying to own physical security infrastructure? You do not have the ability to protect your physical security as well as some of these billion-dollar companies they'll have the video surveillance systems, they'll have biometric systems, they'll have multiple security requirements to enter data centers. You don't have that at your offices. You may have some level of security, but you're not going to be able to compete with the security that you can do with a cloud provider. So really, having things like remote workspaces help with you not having to think about that physical security. You cannot compete with the same amount of physical security that you're going to get with something like a cloud provider, where they just make it easy for you. You don't have to own the security.
Yeah, exactly. I think it just gets down to just don't own it. There's no reason to own it today. And we'll talk a little bit more about cloud security as we're coming up on the next slide. And let's think about it as let's leave and transfer this risk and this problem to Amazon directly. So let's talk about that cloud security a little bit more in detail. Now we're talking about moving our infrastructure to the cloud. We're interested in understanding is, does that expose me to, my neighbors in the cloud, for example? And so I want to touch on that a little bit here, Steve. There's this concept of a private cloud and a public cloud. And the private cloud is really a shared cloud environment that, maybe you've put your equipment in a computer data center, or you're buying it from somebody who's got some computer data center space. And so you're sharing that infrastructure really with other tenants. It's almost like an apartment building. And in that situation, should somebody have a problem in the apartment building, let's say somebody on a lower floor accidentally starts a fire, it impacts everybody in that apartment building. Now, on the public cloud side, what really happens is your environment gets carved out and created much more like a house. You decide how big it is, how complex it is, what the bells and whistles are. And should anything happen down the street, that doesn't impact you directly. And so we've seen that on the public cloud side, on the Amazon side, for example, or the Microsoft Azure side, there's a dramatic amount of controls around protecting you. On the other side, we've seen ransomware, and that goes on and on and on, where it impacts, somebody in the apartment next to you and you get impacted. On the public cloud side, we just don't see that, Steve. Talk a little bit more about, how that environment gets set up.
Sure. The way I explain this, and it's a little bit from the the engineering perspective, that you'll usually see something with like a private cloud where you may have multiple customers all sharing one massive email server that's partitioned off for various customers, and so if something happens to the server, all customers are affected. Where with the public cloud, within the cloud, as you pointed out, Bill, you're carved out your own virtual private network, and these virtual private networks are yours. You don't share them with other people. They're your account. You do what you want within that account. So the ability and specifically when you think about this, when it comes to cloud security, the ability for companies like Amazon, Microsoft with Azure, to really build up those walls around those accounts. You're not going to compete with the security teams from those companies to build up the security around your tenants. So you're really, it kind of comes down to who's watching the store, what's going on. There's teams of people at these companies making sure that data does not overlap. So cloud security is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a dramatic improvement over what anybody could spend. So as we think about the next section, kind of that human element, I really like to think about this as people are the last defense for things that can happen. And kind of the way to think about it is technology's really advanced over the last number of years. So there's dramatic protections around the technical edge of the firm and things like that. And so we've seen really that hacking community, the nefarious community, shift over the last 5 years to focus on the human element. And so as we look at that, we really want to talk about changing our mindset within our organizations to really have a security-first mindset. And what we mean by that is ask those questions, have a defensive mindset. It's really this kind of constant vigilance of when the repairman for the copy machine shows up, making sure that, yep, we had a problem, we ask them to come out, validate who they are and why they're there. There's just so many situations where it's so easy to use things like social engineering to get by people or to get people to do things that, they're wanting to be helpful and they're believing the story, whatever that story might be. But really, it's opening up the firm to a dramatic amount of risk. And we'll talk a little bit about training next. But, Steve, as you think about this, let's talk about, that ransomware example and how it works, that somebody who might be helpful really is enabling, that ransomware to happen.
Absolutely. And before I do, though, this is actually one of my favorite kind of slides to talk about, because it really kind of goes to the heart of today's world, where you need to question everything that you're seeing. And it's not just the IT person's problem to solve ransomware. And the reason for that is, ransomware comes out in something called, and you can Google these terms if you're unfamiliar with them. It comes out with zero-day exploits, zero-hour exploits. There's no way that IT can be in front of some of this ransomware. So you're having to rely on things like technology to protect you. But at the end of the day, humans are generally the weak link in the chain, because you may get a million flags saying something's bad and somebody's still going to click on it and they're going to open it. So when it comes to security, you need to be ahead of the ransomware issues. You do not want to be on the tail end of ransomware where somebody's saying, hey, my computer's acting weird. You want to stop that ransomware before it even gets into your network. And we discuss that more in the next slide, which we'll get to in a minute. But my point here is the company needs to start thinking security. You cannot just put it off onto IT and say, well, okay, go ahead and give us a 15-minute training class on what we need to do. No, it really has to be part of the mindset to protect everybody. And as you start changing the way people think about security, you end up having a much more secure network overall.
Yeah, definitely. I think the key piece there is just as you stated, it's not an IT problem anymore. It's really an individual problem that we're all a part of. So as we think about that, it takes us to this concept of training. And, we all know about training, and historically it's been this annual event that, people sit and listen and watch and then maybe answer some questions. But that's really changed now with so many dramatic improvements from the group that's trying to get your things. It's important to have kind of that idea of continual training. And there's a few approaches. We really like the phishing approach where, organizations get example emails that are not real. They're generated from a service that asks people to click on things, to, approve install of a security patch. It looks like it's coming from a local IT group or somebody you trust. And then those are used to really heighten the awareness and training and defensibility around these phishing attacks. And phishing attacks have gotten much more developed, and organizations that are creating them and delivering them, and we'll talk about that in a minute, really have developed into large, multi-million-dollar organizations. So, Steve, as you think about training, and let's talk a little bit about the vendor that we like, and we see a lot of organizations use KnowBe4, and kind of how that setup works.
That's right. So we use KnowBe4. Our customers do. When you think about training, and it's interesting, when I talk to customers, they think of it as, oh, well, we're going to just take an annual training class. And no, you will take an annual training class, but really, your staff are your last line of defense. They're the ones that make the decision. Do I click on this? Do I not click on this? Do I allow this? Do I not? So training is a journey, and that journey continues every day. We are attacking our own users with phishing emails each day, and when they click on something, it forces them through an additional training program. So having a managed training program that's actually actively watching the user, seeing what they're doing, catching what they're clicking on. The product we use, KnowBe4, is a security and awareness training platform. And it helps find folks that need more training. Phishing is just one aspect of training. I mean, you have social engineering, stuff known as phishing, phone phishing. I mean, the amount of attacks that are happening out there, and they're not, we'll talk more about this in discussing some of the email activity, but, it's not just going for random people anymore. They're actively looking at people inside the firm. Bill?
Yeah, definitely. So our next item is really email security. So we'll talk about this in more detail here. And I just want to, the setup here is that over the last, 15 years or so, we've gotten a variety of original spam that was trying to get people to do things that wasn't very well crafted, looked like it was from maybe out of the country. The language didn't quite read well. It didn't really pass the smell test when you got it. Now, fast forward to the last 5 years, and you've got large organizations. There was one that got shut down last year outside the U.S. that had 300 people in the organization. And they built firm org charts all around the world. And then they watched individuals and looked for their social media presence and, oh, so-and-so is going on vacation. And then they would launch these email attacks. And they were extremely successful. We saw situations in the media where, hundreds of millions of dollars transacted between organizations that were nefarious. People had really tried to look at the emails. They're trying to help whoever's, making the request. Maybe it's an invoice payment. And without good, strong policies and procedures, they're responding to some urgency that's created. And that gets back to some of that training. As we look at email here, we sure want you to have strong email protection tools in place. We want that knowledge within the organization and individuals to be dramatically heightened. I think, Steve, I'll have you talk about kind of that spear phishing idea, how that works a little bit more in detail. But one thing I wanted to mention is that these emails look so good now, whether they're coming from a bank that looks like it might be your bank or might be coming from, a partner within the firm. It looks like it's coming from within the firm. These are really, really good. So having strong policies as it relates to, payments and communications is key. You
Absolutely.
Want to talk about spear phishing a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah. So, spear phishing is when you're really directing your attacks at specific people within the firm. Maybe you're going after the assistant to a managing partner because the managing partner's out. And it's really, let's just face it, it's really tough to have your employees be able to review and catch everything. It's almost impossible. That's why you should change your policies and procedures to mitigate the risk. You could do something like setting a new policy that states when some kind of an email comes in that is asking for gift cards, because gift cards are the most common things, or mailing cash to somebody, something, anything having to do with finances, no longer can just be a single email. You need to pick up the phone and dial the person's extension that is responsible for that. Even if that person, you were expecting it, you call and just confirm, this came from you? Yep, okay, good. And you move on. Now, to protect yourself, there is something that we really strongly recommend as the primary way to protect yourself from spear phishing attacks, because people always just fall for it. They go into some fake website, type in their email address and password because they're told they have to click on an encrypted message, and they end up giving up their email address and password, and voila, their mailbox is compromised, and now the bad guy is sending emails out as that person legitimately to other people within the firm. So the real protection here is MFA. If you implement a real MFA solution, and Bill, you can describe more about a real MFA versus a fake if you want. For the sake of time, I'm just going to say MFA will protect you here. And that is something that we strongly recommend you look at. Now, you can use something like Duo or any other product, but a good MFA solution is what you need here to protect yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually leads into this next slide where we want to talk about multi-factor authentication, MFA, and password managers. And I think and this hit home for me, I suppose it's almost a decade ago, when the FBI came out and said really the only protection that an individual firm could implement that actually dramatically improves their stance against accounts being hacked was MFA. And so we like solutions that use ID and password plus then a phone application that prompts you to approve that login. Duo is a good example of that. There's others. But really, the benefit here lends itself to the defense of what Steve was talking about in the last slide. You get that malware, it looks real, it says, it's from your bank, and it says that, you need to look at this notice. It's an important notice. You click on that. It asks you to log in. In fact, the login looks exactly like your bank. They do that now. It's really good. You enter your credentials, and, the account ends up compromised. With an MFA piece in there, that piece ends up getting missed, and people's accounts end up not being able to get into. On the email side, it's a really good example. We've seen historically where people have had their accounts compromised. And one of the things that's bad is, somebody can send email out as you, and that's bad enough. But the reality of it is once your account's compromised, that person has access to all your email history. And so if you think about that email volume is just dramatic. In your email history, there's reports, there's customer lists. There's a significant amount of information there, and information then that typically needs to be reported locally and statewide and possibly even to the bar in what got exposed. So the key piece here is to use MFA, use it everywhere. Now, the tough piece about it, and Steve, I'll have you talk about password managers here. The tough piece about it is you want to use, a different password for everything. And so you're not reusing that password, and that's tough to manage, and that's where password managers come into play. Steve, let's talk about that.
Yeah, as human beings, it's impossible to remember big, long, complex passwords, especially if you're trying to have different passwords for every location you visit. And as we all know, many people like simplistic passwords, and they like to reuse those passwords over and over and over again. So for this specific slide, I actually have a link here as more of an exercise for you that is worth doing. The website there, Have I Been Owned? If you just kind of jot that down, it's a real website, nothing fake. You go to the website and you plug in your email address. And if your email address, which you use because email addresses are used for accounts in most everything now, if your email address and a password combination that you have used with many, many major companies has ever been compromised, it's going to show up on that list. Most likely, if anybody's had an Adobe account and you put in your email address at that account with Adobe, your password was probably compromised at a big breach a couple of years ago. And if you're still using that password, that means bad people out there know that email address and that password combination possibly can work somewhere. So a recommendation here is to start thinking differently and start implementing something like a managed password solution or a secure password manager. Some of the most common companies are LastPass, 1Password, and RoboForm. So, those are companies that offer corporate password management solutions, and you can manage how your end users store passwords. They may have to use two-factor authentication just to access the password managers. The password managers are multi-platform. They can work on a Windows PC, a Mac PC, Android, iPhones. You can put them on your devices so the end users don't have to manage their passwords. They can just generate random passwords for each website or each program that they need to store passwords in. And you can manage them from a corporate level so that you don't have to worry about, oh, I forgot my password. Oh, who's going to reset that? So really, corporate password managers are one way that you can really reduce the amount of those, let's call them low security passwords that make their way out there. Bill?
You bet. Yeah, and somebody had asked the question, the website is haveibeenOwnedwithap.com, and so that's the correct spelling of the website. So there's a P there instead of an O. So just wanted to. It is known as
Leet speak for those. It's known as Leet speak.
Yeah. So thanks for that. Next and last here, we want to talk about data, and sometimes this is the most critical piece We want to make sure that what we're protecting is our client's data. And so it's the information that, you use within the firm on a daily basis. It's their private and confidential information. We take a look at this as if all information is in need of protection here. So we want to touch on the last two items here. And the first one's a pretty straightforward one, and it's encryption. And what we really are talking about here is encryption everywhere. So encryption in flight, when you're using some application or information's going across the internet, we need that encrypted. We want encryption at rest. When files are stored within the cloud, it should always be encrypted. And if you pull information down to that local laptop, or you're carrying in electronic information around with you on a hard drive, a USB stick, or that laptop, it's got to be encryption. Steve, as we think about the cloud here, and typically we get this question, well, what about my data in the cloud? Is it encrypted? Is it my data? Can somebody get at it? Let's talk about that just a little bit here.
Sure. I mean, really, the primary topic here is, I think, encryption at rest, right? Where you're putting your data, it's sitting there 24 hours a day. What's happening to it? How is it encrypted? What does that mean? And so what we're saying in a more simplistic approach is here is moving your data to the cloud is really the easiest way for you to ease implementations of encryption. You maybe have an on-prem network where you have legacy servers, you have data that really can't be encrypted per se on those servers in an easy form. You may have to use a third-party format. When you start moving your data into the cloud, you now are relying on the shared responsibility model of the cloud provider to manage the encryption in the sense, and I don't mean manage it by them owning encryption keys. You can own your encryption keys, but the provider can do things like rotating your encryption keys for you so that nothing is getting stale. Things that you may not be doing with your own private data on your servers on premise, but when you do your encryption within the cloud provider, you really just ease the management of handling that encryption. Is that what you're asking, Bill? More like just the simplistic concept there, right?
Yeah, and I think the reality of it is that when you use a cloud delivery mechanism and you move your things to the cloud, it's automatic, it's built in, it's a set and check, and you end up with a lot of confidence around that. We're down to the last item here, and for me, this is one of the key tenets to protecting your firm, protecting your data, and ultimately protecting your clients. And the concept here is this least access approach to data and info. So think about it as least access approach to information, whether that's files, whether it's documents, whether it's inside of an application. And this is a control that you really are responsible for within the firm. Who has access to what? And the goal is that everyone has access to the information they need to do their job, and that they don't have access to other things. So if and this is whether you're a partner, you're an associate, depending on your job within the organization, you've got a span of information that you need access to. Outside of that, having you limit your access dramatically protects you, number one, as an individual, and protects the firm overall. We see this requirement on the wealth management side for maybe almost the last decade. And as we're looking within firms, this is a key tenet to really protecting your client's data from overexposure. And so, the best piece here is that this is something you end up responsible for. And Steve, let's talk a little bit about, how this impacts things like ransomware.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to bring back my castle analogy now. As you can kind of tell, we're building the Tower of London. So you have your castle analogy. So you have your outer walls to your castle. Then I said you have your keep where you're storing all of your corporate data. Now what we're talking about with the least access approach to the data and controlling exposure to that data is putting data for specific users in specific rooms inside the keep and then locking those rooms off to everyone else. So what you're doing here is what we're really talking about is changing the way we think. In the past, people have said, hey, we're going to have very big drives. People have access to everything. They can get what they want. It's easy. Let's be realistic. It's easy. It's easy to manage, but it also does not stop ransomware. And when a drive with all of your data gets hit, you will lose all of that data to the ransomware, and you're going to have to go to backup and restore your data. By doing a least access approach and storing specific data in specific rooms inside your keep, now if something happens to that data, it's really only happening within that one room, and you're limiting the exposure to data outside of that room. So this castle analogy is something that I use all the time because it's easy to kind of visualize how you are accessing data, and you can describe it to people. Bill?
You bet. So as we're looking at these, really, 7 or 8 out of these 10, a strong partner can help you implement their technical pieces. You can share the risk and transfer some of the risk to other parties like the cloud provider. This is one of these areas where this is on you, and it's tougher. This is one where, it takes time to be rigorous with this. The value is significant, but, it takes effort. Let's go on and kind of summarize where we've come and what we've looked at, and how do I deal with this today? So how do you get started? The way I look at it is, it's important to understand your current exposures. You want to take an overall look. You want to look at policies and procedures. You want to look at training that you can put in place for your employees, those email tools and multi-factor authentication. You want to prioritize the exposures that you've got. That's the first step. Second step, when you look at that training, it's really easy to implement that fairly quickly. And the one thing I want to talk about here just for a second is that as you look at the testing that's done on this phishing training, it's really kind of interesting. Initially, when you go through it, typically what we're seeing is about 30 to 35% of your staff will click on those emails that really are the phishing emails. And that happens, before training. You then go through training, that number changes and goes down. Ultimately, after you've implemented that, what the statistics show is you end up down to around 3 or 4%. So your exposure drops so dramatically by training your staff. Steve, let's have you talk about MFA and, as that next step as well.
Sure. I really kind of break my thoughts down into 3 things that I like to leave people with. One is think differently about how you are implementing security in your policies and procedures now. Think about the castle. Think about the fact that you are extending your network. If you are using things like VPNs to allow people to access your firm data from outside the office, and they have insecure home Wi-Fi, then technically you may have a bad guy that's just staring at all the traffic going back and forth between your office. You may think, well, I've got a VPN. Well, understand how that technology works to truly understand that you do need to think about users' home Wi-Fi if you're giving them direct access to your firm data. You should also, number 2, get consistent with training. Thinking that you can just attend a 15-minute training class isn't sufficient in today's world. You need to be training day in and day out without even realizing you're doing it. In fact, the best anti-phishing training is phishing your end users with fake phishing emails and having nobody click on them. That is, then you're doing well. And if there's one product that I think that you should go away from this webinar thinking about, and that's MFA. MFA is the best protection against ransomware, against people stealing your credentials. I mean, they may get your credentials to a mailbox because somebody still types them into an account or into a web page, but they can't get into the account. So MFA is really, really your strongest protection, and real MFA, not MFA that just sends you text messages that can be spoofed. I mean a real MFA product.
Yeah, I think the last piece here I want to touch on is the importance of working with a cloud service provider, a partner that knows your industry. And we see this time and time again that without that focus on somebody who's really understanding, the legal environment, the law firm itself, the applications, document management, matter management, without somebody who's actively understanding what you're going through, you end up missing out on so much as it relates to security for the firm and support within that environment. When we look at, as I had said, when we look back at these top 10, we really see that having a partner, and a partner who's focused on your industry, they can help deliver, really 8 out of 10 of these, with you focused on, your internal users training as well as then that data piece. So that ends up such an important role. Carolyn, thank you so much for this, and I think there's a few questions that have possibly come in.
Yeah, wonderful stuff, Bill and Steve. You guys make a great team, great information. We do have a few quick questions. One of them, Steve, if you could answer this: if no data is stored on a laptop, only Outlook and a VPN icon to the office, should laptops still have some type of encryption? And if so, what type?
That is an interesting question because if you are running Outlook on your laptop, you probably do have data stored on that laptop. You have what's called cached data. You can talk with your IT person. They can explain it to you. So you technically may have firm data on your laptop, including attachments that are part of emails within Outlook. So if you are doing that, you do want to encrypt your laptop. And I would say really what type of encryption, it's up to however you want to store your encryption. I would probably recommend like a Microsoft-based encryption where you can store your keys in AD so that when somebody loses them, your IT folks are able to restore them for you. But really here, what we're talking about is if you really want to truly secure your data, get Outlook and the VPN off the laptop, put on some kind of remote client that you can access your corporate data inside of your Castle's Keep and only access that data when you are connected to the Castle's Keep. And that's how you can truly secure it. Okay?
Great. Another question here, and again, if anyone has any additional questions, you can chat right now to all panelists, and we can get those in while we still have a few moments. But a question here, do we still own our data if it's in the cloud? Can you or the cloud provider access it?
Great question. I'll take this one. You still own your data. All the agreements say you own the data. You're responsible for the data. There is this shared responsibility matrix that all cloud providers have that talk about who does what. And ownership of data, is completely always in the client's hand. Exposure of data, let's say to a support individual, that's something that's in your hand as well, but periodically we see that get shared a little bit. If you're having an issue, maybe you're having an issue with a document or your Matter application, and you're asking support to help, we want you to think about what you're exposing to that third-party support person, and quite honestly, that third-party support person wants to be protective from overexposure of data as well. So that ends up, an important part of that. But that's kind of how it looks, is you end up always owning that data.
Okay, another question that came in, what about mobile phone security for those employees who access firm emails from their cell phones? What are the best security practices here? Again,
MFA is important here. We see that there's options to do MFA on your phone or not. We always like to include those options. It's literally just the press of a button that says, yes, this is me, ID and password, and yes, this is me. And then that allows you access to that email. I think the key piece there is this idea of multi-factor authentication everywhere. So whether it's your iPad, your phone, your laptop, any of those access methods, you want that multi-factor authentication implemented.
And I'd like to add to that. I'd like to add, you could take that to another level as well, depending upon your compliance requirements, such as sandboxing your emails within your phones. You may have a requirement where email that exists on the phone is considered outside of your castle walls. So you have to somehow sandbox that email and those attachments away from other applications on the phone. So I'll throw out there right off the top of my head something like Intune, since many firms are standardized on Office 365. Intune is a Microsoft product that can take you to the level that you need, such as offering you to sandbox the mailboxes, as well as offering remote wipe facilities in case the device is compromised or hacked.
Yep.
Okay. Another question, would a token app the users download to their phones count as a real MFA solution?
You want
me to take that one?
Steve? Sure.
Yeah, sure. So I believe the answer here is yes, if we're thinking about the same thing. And I'll try to describe it quickly. If we're talking about a website that says, give me your phone number and I will text you every time you want to log in, and that website somehow has a separate application for tokens, that's not a real MFA app, because you can spoof the sending of that token via the text message. So an application that is using that, such as the Duo or OnePass or OneLogin, or even the Microsoft Authenticator, the Google Authenticator, where you have things where you may have a code that is cycling every 30 seconds. That's what I'm talking about when I'm saying an app, a real MFA app. And many of those you'll see where they'll say, take a picture of a QR code that's on a screen. Those are valid MFA apps.
Okay. And what do you think of setting up an automatic flag for external emails?
I think I'll take that. I think that's a reasonable option. There's a number of solutions that implement things like that, so that, you as an individual who got an email from, let's say it's a partner within the firm, you see that it was an internal email. So the flag that it was an external email, I think that's a reasonable piece as a flag to look at and say, this is coming from outside. There's a number of solutions that implement different levels of kind of structure around email, from really sequestering all the attachments and having them all scanned and looked at and approved. Microsoft's Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, that's an add-on to that service, has that capability and then runs those through kind of a filter to identify is that a malware piece. So there's a number of different kind of levels of security around here. A flag is a straightforward one, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I can add to that, Bill. We've seen that our customers have really enjoyed just having a small banner message show up on their emails from external sources, especially, as you pointed out, when they get those emails that look like they're coming from a managing partner. Most everything's been spoofed, except that banner can't be spoofed because your email system is adding the banner to the message. So that's a real big flag saying, hey, wait a second. It looks like it's coming from the managing partner, but it's still coming from outside, so it's definitely not. So it's a nice flag. I like them.
All right, and one final question here is, I've heard of people who have gotten surprised by huge cloud costs every month. How do we prevent that?
Sure. I'll take this one. So it's an interesting example, and it's a story that hits a lot of organizations. Is when they first identify, gee, we want to move things to the public cloud. The first thing they see, or their technical group sees, is, oh, this is easy. This is straightforward. And so they set up a number of servers, move some things. They're testing it, maybe doing a proof of concept. Excuse me. Then they get the bill, and the bill is significant and dramatic, and it's a shock. And then after that, they look for, okay, so if we're going to use this, how do we do it in a smart way? And that's where leveraging a partner, an industry partner like us, somebody who can look at that, really understand the setup ahead of time, how to best optimize that, how to really get you to an environment where you pay for what you use and no more. That's a key piece here. And that's really where a cloud service provider who knows their stuff delivers and saves you a dramatic amount of money and headache.
Great. Wonderful, wonderful information you guys shared with everyone, and I know everyone was very attentive throughout the whole presentation. So thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for asking the questions. And this concludes today's webcast. So thank you all for attending. We will send out an email tomorrow with a link for the webinar, and of course you can visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts. Steve and Bill, thank you guys so much for your insights.
Great.
Have a very nice day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Take care.